She thought her home was a safe place, a sanctuary where she could prepare for the new life growing inside her. But one night, safety shattered in the most terrifying way. A mother walked in, expecting peace, and instead found her pregnant daughter-in-law in a moment of unthinkable pain, betrayed not just by family, but by something far deeper. What unfolded next wasn't just a family secret. It revealed the chilling cost of silence, power, and prejudice. And once the truth came out, nothing would ever be the same. Before the world around her spiraled into chaos, Maya's life was quiet, almost ordinary. She was 27, newly married, and expecting her first child, a dream she had carried since she was a little girl. The soft hum of the lake outside her window, the warmth of sunlight spilling into her kitchen each morning, and the gentle touch of her growing belly made her believe she had finally found her safe place in the world. But beneath the surface of that peace, small cracks had already begun to show. Maya had always known what it meant to be different. As a Black woman living in a community where faces like hers were few, she carried herself with quiet strength, often brushing off the stares, the whispered comments, the subtle pauses at the grocery store counter. She told herself it was nothing, that people didn't mean harm. She had learned to smile, to make herself smaller in certain spaces, to avoid conflict. But behind closed doors, those unspoken battles weighed heavy. Her marriage to Daniel had been a leap of faith. He was from a very different world, a white man raised in a family that prided itself on appearances, reputation, and tradition. Daniel loved Maya, or at least that was what he said when they married. At first she believed him. He was charming, attentive, and protective. But as months passed and her pregnancy advanced, his charm began to wear thin. Stress replaced tenderness, impatience replaced warmth. His words became sharp, sometimes laced with the same prejudices Maya had long fought against outside their home. Still, Maya tried to hold her world together. She decorated the nursery with soft blues and yellows, read baby books late at night, and prayed her child would grow up in a kinder world than the one she knew. She told herself that Daniel's frustrations were temporary, that fatherhood would soften him. But there was another presence in their lives that Maya could never ignore. Daniel's mother, Evelyn. Evelyn was the kind of woman who carried herself like a queen without a crown. Her opinions filled every room, her gaze sharp enough to cut through silence. From the beginning, she had made her feelings clear. Maya was not who she had imagined for her son. She masked her disdain with forced politeness, but Maya felt it every time Evelyn's eyes lingered a little too long on her skin, every time she questioned her choices as though Maya were incapable of making them. And yet, Maya still longed for Evelyn's acceptance. Perhaps it was the hope that her child would one day have a grandmother's love, or perhaps it was her own quiet wish to belong fully to Daniel's family. Whatever the reason, Maya swallowed her discomfort and endured. She smiled at family dinners. She offered help where it wasn't wanted. She tried, desperately, to bridge a gap that Evelyn had no intention of closing. As the days slipped closer to her due date, Maya began to feel the tension building, though she couldn't quite name it. There were moments when Daniel's temper seemed to simmer too close to the surface. A slammed door, a muttered insult, a grip on her arm that lingered a second too long. Each time Maya convinced herself it was stress, nothing more. She couldn't let herself imagine what it might become. Life outside their home mirrored that same pressure. News headlines filled with stories of injustice, communities divided by hatred, protests demanding change. Maya couldn't escape the reminder that her child would be born into a world that still questioned their worth. She wondered how she would teach them to survive, how to stay strong when even the walls of her own home seemed fragile. Still, there were moments of light. The baby's first kick, the way sunlight painted the nursery walls in the morning, the quiet dreams she whispered into the stillness at night. Maya clung to those small things, because they reminded her of why she endured, why she believed that better days might come. But the night that would change everything was already approaching. It would not begin with shouting or chaos, but with something deceptively ordinary, Evelyn's unannounced visit. She had a habit of walking into the house without warning, her voice carrying through the halls before her presence could be ignored. That night, she expected to find her son and daughter-in-law preparing for the baby, maybe sharing a quiet dinner. maybe arguing over something small. What she found instead would shatter every illusion. Maya's life, once built on fragile hopes, was about to be torn open in the most brutal way, forcing everyone involved to confront truths they had tried to bury. The cracks beneath the surface could no longer be ignored, and the cost of silence would become clearer than ever. The night Evelyn stepped into the house, everything changed. The clock had barely struck 8 when the door creaked open, her heels tapping against the hardwood floor. She called out Daniel's name, her voice sharp and commanding, the kind that demanded a response. Silence answered her back, but it wasn't the comfortable kind. It was heavy, filled with something unspoken. She moved further into the home, expecting the familiar smell of dinner or the soft sound of a television playing in the background. Instead, she heard a muffled cry, a sound so faint it almost didn't register, but once it did, her chest tightened. She followed it down the hall, each step pulling her closer to a scene she would never forget. When Evelyn pushed open the bedroom door, her breath caught in her throat. Daniel stood over Maya, his hands gripping her arm with a violence that twisted her body in pain. Maya's face was streaked with tears, her free hand wrapped protectively around her stomach, as though shielding the child inside her from the storm outside. For a moment, time froze. Evelyn saw not just her son, but the truth she had tried to ignore, the anger that lived beneath his skin, the prejudice he had inherited, but now twisted into cruelty. She had always believed her son's frustrations were harmless, that his words were nothing but stress spilling out. But in that room there was no denying it. His rage had found a target, and it was the woman carrying his child. Evelyn shouted his name, her voice shaking the walls. Daniel froze, his grip loosening, but the damage had already been done. Maya stumbled back, clutching her belly, fear and shame written across her face. The tension didn't end with that single moment. It only grew. In the days that followed, whispers rippled through the family. Evelyn confronted Daniel, demanding answers he refused to give. He dismissed what happened as a misunderstanding, blamed Maya for exaggerating, for provoking him. It was the same pattern Maya had endured silently for months, his anger twisted into blame, his guilt buried beneath excuses. But Maya could no longer hide behind silence. Every look in Evelyn's eyes reminded her of the truth. What happened in that room wasn't an accident. It was part of something larger, something more dangerous. Outside the walls of their home, life offered no refuge. At the doctor's office, Maya noticed the subtle ways she was treated differently. Questions directed to Daniel instead of her. Assumptions about her background. Stares that lingered too long on her skin before moving on to the glow of her pregnancy. She had lived with these slights all her life. But now, carrying a child, they cut deeper. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the world her baby would enter. And then came the breaking point. One afternoon, Maya left the house to buy groceries. She walked through the aisles, her belly slowing her steps, her mind clouded with the weight of home. At the register, the cashier avoided her eyes, barely spoke, and when Maya reached for her change, the coins were dropped carelessly onto the counter instead of placed in her hand. A small act, but one that spoke volumes. Behind her, a woman sighed loudly, muttering that people like her always slowed things down. Maya swallowed the sting, but when she stepped outside, her strength faltered. The weight of everything, Daniel's cruelty, Evelyn's piercing judgment, the community's constant reminders of her otherness, crashed down on her. Tears blurred her vision, and for the first time, she wondered if she was strong enough to keep going. Evelyn noticed the change. She saw how Maya moved slower, how her eyes carried shadows, how her laughter, once soft but present, had vanished. Evelyn, who once believed Maya didn't belong, now found herself silently questioning everything she had stood for. She had raised her son to value strength, to protect family. Yet here she was, watching him destroy it. The silence between them thickened until it broke one evening. Evelyn found Maya sitting in the nursery, surrounded by half-assembled furniture, her hands resting on her stomach as tears fell quietly. In that moment, Evelyn realized the choice before her: remain silent and protect her son, or stand up for a woman she had never fully accepted. But even before Evelyn could decide, the next storm struck. Daniel returned home that night in a rage. Work stress, money problems, excuses piled on top of excuses, but his anger needed an outlet. And once again, Maya stood in its path. Evelyn, standing in the kitchen, heard the thud of a slammed door, the sharp rise of his voice, the desperate plead of Maya's. Her heart pounded, as she realized she could no longer pretend she didn't hear. She rushed down the hall, fear twisting her steps, and when she reached the doorway, what she saw made her blood run cold. Daniel's hand was raised again, his face contorted with fury, Maya shrinking back with nowhere left to run, and in that split second, Evelyn's world shattered. Would she intervene and betray her own son? Or stay silent and let violence, prejudice, and fear destroy the life of the woman carrying her grandchild? The answer would change everything. The air in the hallway was heavy, almost suffocating. Evelyn stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding against her chest as if urging her to act. Daniel towered over Maya, his shadow swallowing her small frame. His face was twisted with rage, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Maya's back was pressed against the wall, her trembling hands wrapped protectively around her stomach. It was no longer a simple argument, no longer a moment of frustration. This was violence, raw, deliberate, and dangerous. And for Evelyn, it was the moment of truth. She had raised Daniel, taught him right from wrong, told herself he was a good man at heart. But what she was witnessing now was not the son she had once rocked to sleep. It was a man consumed by hate, anger, and entitlement. The kind of man who could destroy everything in front of him if no one stopped him. "Maya," Daniel snarled, his words thick with venom. "You never listen." Before he could finish, Evelyn's voice tore through the room. "Enough." The word echoed, sharp and commanding, but Daniel didn't lower his hand. He turned his head, eyes locking on his mother with disbelief. For the first time in his life, she wasn't standing behind him. She wasn't defending him. She wasn't silent. Maya's sobs filled the room, her tears streaking down her cheeks as she slid lower against the wall. Every instinct in Evelyn screamed at her to protect her grandchild, to protect the woman she had once dismissed, to protect the fragile life teetering on the edge of ruin. But stepping forward meant betraying her son. The war inside her burned as Daniel's hand came crashing down toward Maya's shoulder. Evelyn lunged, grabbing his arm mid-swing. Her strength surprised even her. But desperation can make anyone strong. Daniel staggered back, his eyes wide with shock. "Mother, what are you doing?" He spat, as if her intervention was the betrayal, not his violence. Evelyn's voice trembled but did not break. "What I should have done long ago." The room pulsed with tension, every second stretching endlessly. Maya's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps, her hand clutching her belly as though sheer willpower could shield her child. But Daniel wasn't finished. His face darkened, his pride wounded. "She's tearing this family apart," he shouted, pointing at Maya as though she were the intruder. "She doesn't belong here." And in that moment, the deeper truth surfaced. His violence wasn't just about anger, stress, or frustration. It was rooted in something Evelyn had long ignored. The prejudice that ran like poison through his words. Through his veins, through the way he saw Maya not as his wife, not as the mother of his child, but as someone unworthy. Someone lesser. Evelyn felt her stomach twist. How many times had she excused his sharp comments, his dismissive tone, his disdain masked as jokes? How many times had she stayed silent, convincing herself it wasn't serious? Silence had been her shield. But now, her silence had become a weapon, one Daniel had used to justify his cruelty. Maya's sob broke through Evelyn's thoughts. She slid down the wall, clutching her stomach, whispering prayers that her child would survive this storm. Fear rippled through Evelyn's veins. This wasn't just about family anymore. This was about survival. She had seconds to choose. Protect her son's pride, or protect Maya and the unborn child whose heartbeat pulsed like a fragile flame inside her. Evelyn reached for her phone with trembling hands. Daniel's face twisted in horror as realization struck. "Don't you dare!" he hissed. But she had already dialed. Her voice, steady and unshakable, carried the weight of years of denial breaking apart. My son is hurting his wife. She's pregnant. Please, send someone now. The words left her mouth and the world shifted. For the first time, Evelyn had chosen truth over blood, justice over silence. Daniel's rage exploded. He stormed forward, his hand slapping the phone from her grip. It clattered to the floor, the dispatcher's voice faintly audible through the speaker. Evelyn's body tensed, ready for whatever came next, but Daniel froze at the sound of sirens wailing in the distance. Someone else had heard. Someone else had called. Panic lit his eyes. For the first time, fear replaced fury. He looked between his mother and his wife, his chest heaving. The mask he had worn all his life, the image of a respectable man, a provider, a son worth admiring, crumbled under the weight of exposure. Maya, still trembling, looked up at Evelyn. In her eyes was something more powerful than gratitude. It was the desperate plea of a woman who had been silenced too long, finally seeing someone stand for her. But the night was not over. The pounding at the door grew louder, fists slamming against wood as voices shouted for entry. Daniel's steps faltered, his bravado fading. For once, he had nowhere to hide. The walls of that house had witnessed too much. Violence cloaked in excuses, prejudice buried under silence, love twisted into control. And now, those walls would bear witness to the truth finally breaking free. Evelyn's heart thundered as officers entered, their voices filling the space with commands. Daniel's protests rang out, desperate, defiant, but no longer believable. Maya, still crumpled against the wall, was gently lifted to safety. Evelyn hovered near her, her hand trembling as it reached for Maya's shoulder. This time Maya didn't shrink back. The night had turned. The mask had fallen. The truth was out, and as Daniel was led away, his eyes locked on his mother with a look that carried both betrayal and fury. Evelyn whispered words only she could hear. This ends now. But ending the violence didn't mean ending the pain. For Maya, for Evelyn, for the child not yet born, the battle was only beginning. Because when silence is broken, when the truth is finally spoken, the world doesn't just listen, it reacts. And what came after this night would test them all. The flashing red and blue lights faded into the distance as Daniel was taken away, his shouts echoing like a storm that refused to die down. The house was left in silence, but it wasn't peace. It was the heavy quiet that lingers after destruction. When the pieces of a shattered world lay scattered on the floor, Maya sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that couldn't seem to warm her trembling body. Her hands rested over her stomach, feeling for the faint movements that reassured her the child inside had survived the chaos. Her body was safe for the moment, but her heart was fractured. She had married for love, trusted promises, built dreams, and now those dreams lay broken in the very place she once thought was home. Evelyn sat across from her, her face pale, her hands shaking as she tried to hold a cup of tea steady. For years she had chosen silence. For years she had excused her son's behavior, convinced herself his flaws were harmless. But now the truth was unavoidable. Her silence had given his cruelty space to grow, and it nearly cost Maya and her unborn grandchild everything. That night, Evelyn apologized, but the words felt small, almost powerless. Maya didn't respond. She didn't have to. The look in her eyes said more than words ever could. Forgiveness was not immediate, and maybe it never would be. Trust had been broken too many times. In the days that followed, the weight of what happened rippled outward. Police reports, hospital visits, endless questions from officials, all pulling at the wounds that had barely begun to close. The story didn't stay private for long. In communities already divided by race and prejudice, whispers became conversations. Conversations became judgments. Some rushed to defend Daniel, calling him stressed or misunderstood. Others saw the truth clearly. A Black woman had been abused, disrespected and silenced, and it had taken too long for anyone to act. Maya, though shaken, refused to disappear into silence again. For the first time, she realized her survival was not just for herself, but for her child. Each time she placed her hand on her belly, she remembered that her strength mattered, that breaking the cycle of violence and prejudice mattered. She began to speak, slowly at first, sharing her story with social workers, with women's groups, with those who asked. And in her voice, there was pain, but also defiance. Evelyn, too, began a painful transformation. She could no longer cling to the illusion that racism and violence were problems out there, belonging to other people, other families. It was in her home, in her son, in the silence she had chosen. She began to see how her own prejudices, subtle but steady, had laid the groundwork for Daniel's anger to grow unchecked. It was not enough to call the police once the damage had been done. She had to reckon with the years she had spent looking away. For both women, the path forward was uncertain. Maya faced single motherhood, legal battles, and the unrelenting weight of judgment from those who refused to see the truth. Evelyn faced the collapse of her family's image, the shame of knowing her son's choices, and the responsibility of standing beside the woman she had once rejected. But in that uncertainty, something unexpected took root: courage. Maya discovered strength she never knew she had. She began preparing not just for her child's birth, but for the world they would inherit. She vowed to raise her baby with love fierce enough to counter the hate they might encounter. She vowed never to allow silence to take root again. Evelyn, humbled and shaken, chose a different kind of courage. She stood with Maya, even when it meant facing neighbors who whispered, even when it meant admitting to herself that her silence had been complicity. She began speaking openly about what she had witnessed, what she had ignored, what she had learned. For the first time in her life, she listened, not to defend herself, but to understand. The night of violence became more than just a private tragedy. It became a mirror, reflecting the truth so many would rather turn away from. How many women endure abuse in silence because their voices are doubted? How many Black women, in particular, are dismissed, judged, or ignored until the harm becomes undeniable? How many families excuse prejudice until it destroys the very thing they claim to protect? Maya's story was not unique, and that was the most painful truth of all. Her suffering echoed countless others, names in the news, faces in protests, voices that demanded to be heard. What happened in that quiet home was part of a much larger story, a story of racism, of silence, of violence hidden behind closed doors. And unless people chose to confront it, it would continue, generation after generation. As Maya prepared to welcome her child into the world, she carried with her not just scars, but lessons. She learned that silence is dangerous, that strength is born not in hiding but in speaking, that love without respect is not love at all, and that even in the darkest nights, courage can spark change. And for Evelyn, the lesson was just as clear. It is never too late to stand up, but waiting too long comes with a price. The house where the violence happened no longer looked the same to either of them. It wasn't just walls and rooms anymore. It was a reminder of how quickly silence could turn a home into a prison. But it was also a place where change began. Because in that house, a woman broke her silence. A mother confronted her son, and a story once hidden in shadows stepped into the light. So now the question is not just about Maya, or Evelyn, or Daniel. The question is about all of us. When we see injustice, when we see prejudice, violence, or cruelty, will we stay silent, or will we speak? Because silence is never neutral. Silence is a choice. And sometimes, silence is the loudest weapon of all. This story isn't just about one family. It's about the silence and prejudice that too many people live with every day. Maya's fight for safety and dignity is the same fight countless others face in our world right now. So I'll leave you with this question. If you witnessed injustice in your own home, in your own community, would you have the courage to speak? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories that reveal the truths we cannot ignore.